Let's start. So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the last day of our conference, Actors, Singers, and Celebrity Cultures Across the Centuries. Today we will start with a panel devoted to celebrity and the media. And our first presenter, Kimberly, I will introduce her briefly. Kimberly is a soprano, pianist, and teacher. She specializes in opera and new music, performing an array of challenging and non-traditional repertoire, and has appeared on Naxos, Albany, and Centaur Records. Kimberly earned her PhD in music theory and history at the University of Connecticut, where she also completed her BM in vocal performance, and her dissertation, Does Sound Wear Tweeds? Exploring Gender Through Ethel Smith's The Weckers, examines the attribution of gender characteristics to music. Her research interests include performance and analysis, feminist and queer methodologies, and music theory pedagogy. Non-musical interests include the beach, cats, and the Oxford comma. This morning, Kimberly is going to talk us about Beyond the Spotlight, Chappell, Roan, and Celebrity in the Digital Age. Please welcome Kimberly.
Thank you, everybody. So we are now in the 21st century after hearing a lot about not the 21st century. So here we are. Okay, there we go. So I will acknowledge that I personally do not listen to a lot of pop music. This is not because I have a bias against it, but rather that I got stuck in the early 2010s indie pop rock scene as a comfort genre out of my master's degrees. But I taught a class on feminisms in the arts for undergraduates in 2023 and 24. And when I was teaching this class, I took the opportunity to learn from my undergraduates about current artists that I could incorporate into my curriculum and to whom I could listen. And this coincided with Brat Summer, and the summer I was writing my dissertation. And so while writing about Ethel Smythe, who I love to see, has her little statuette in the lobby, and I definitely took an excursion to Woking when I arrived here. While writing about Smythe, I fell in love with Chappell Roan. And so while reading and writing about critical reception of Smythe, I noticed a couple parallels between the two dogged and queer outspoken women, which I'm trying to piece together a way to make this an academic pursuit, but it's still a germ. And so while one was arguing with reviewers in German and English newspapers, one was angering fans on social media. And so while I looked at articles just in April and May that discussed the sum of her controversies, I found these following 4 headlines. And so this is nothing compared to the individual articles that describe in great detail her numerous cited controversies, which range to the cancellation of concerts, to mothers who hate their lives. And this is not to mention the numerous Reddit threads, posts on Twitter, X, and other social media platforms. And the first headline that I've put especially caught my eye with its last 2 words, thus far. And that phrase builds this anticipation, suggesting that Roan will continue to stir controversy with her statements and actions. And I feel that this is the appropriate time to say that I'm not here to defend Roan, nor to defend her actions or statements, but what interests me instead about what this moment reveals about the evolving relationship between artists and their audiences. So what I'm interested in is not just about her as a pop star, but about what her reception tells us about how celebrity functions in the digital age, especially for queer and female artists. So what I'm bringing together are a few theoretical lenses. So a post-structural lens to consider celebrity as this fragmented and unstable identity, a parasocial theory to explore how fans emotionally and publicly engage with performers, and a feminist critique to examine how authenticity and empowerment are both expected but also regulated. And so together, these lenses help us examine how Roan's image is created, contested, and consumed, particularly online, where the artist-audience boundaries are porous and constantly in flux. So fan communities have always played an active role in constructing celebrity, but in the digital age, their engagement with performers is more direct and influential. Criticism of Roan, among other artists, exemplifies the tension between the artist's real self and the constructed persona fans both celebrate and police. As digital platforms blur the line between artist and audience, fans hold increasing influence over a performer's career, shaping not only their image, but their professional trajectory. So, as an elder millennial, I never had parasocial relationships with bands or artists I loved, but rather I bought their CDs and merchandise and just went on my way. Feeling entitled to access or explanation simply was not how I engaged with pop culture. So watching this digital revolution from afar and noting the shift of audiences from passive consumers like myself to active agents in the construction of stardom has been fascinating from a sociological standpoint. Fans today don't just consume media, they respond to it, remix it, talk back to it, and often feel a kind of co-ownership over the celebrity's image and narrative. This shift raises compelling questions about how fame functions, how meaning is made, and who gets to participate in that process. Traditional models of celebrity as either media fabrication or individual genius no longer seem adequate. So using a post-structural approach to understanding celebrity means examining it not only as an expression of essential self or the result of pure media construction, but as a contested and evolving site of meaning shaped by multiple actors and cultural forces across time. So rather than locating celebrity solely as individual talent or in a top-down media manipulation, this view sees fame as emerging from a network of intertextual practices involving agents, journalism, producers, and fans. So within this framework, parasocial relationships are not just simply one-sided emotional attachments to an authentic individual, but engagements with this constructed and continually shifting persona. In this book, Celebrity, Chris Rojek notes that regarding the relationship between fan and celebrity is a reciprocal relation constructed around an anonymous consumer and a public face, an observation that underscores the ambiguity and mutual implication at the heart of this parasocial interaction. Audiences play an active role in interpreting, circulating, and sometimes resisting celebrity images, making these parasocial connections both affective and participatory. These relationships become sites where cultural meanings are negotiated and where the dispersed power dynamics of celebrity are enacted. So thus, post-structuralism reveals parasocial relationships as integral to the production and maintenance of celebrity itself, embedded in the same field of representations, negotiations, and contradictions. So in his book, Convergence Culture, Henry Jenkins wrote, "We feel passionately about popular culture. We embrace its characters. We integrate its stories into our own lives. We rework them and make them our own. Consumers and fans take pleasure in their newfound power to shape their media environment, and that they are using elements borrowed from popular culture to broker conversations with people they have never met face to face." So written in 2006, this statement was prescient as it unknowingly predicted, so pre-Facebook, pre-X, and pre-Reddit, the problems that arise between the power that one feels making combatant statements being a faceless avatar at a keyboard. As celebrities become increasingly accessible on social media, the boundaries are blurred between public and private, scripted and spontaneous. They are able to perform authenticity in real time, whether it be live streams, posts, or comments. This creates the illusion of closeness or access, and lines between admiration, critique, entitlement, and harassment begin to dissolve. Parasocial relationships in the digital era are no longer merely emotional investments in mediated personas. They are also arenas for performative activity, identity, and moral positioning by fans themselves, enacted in public and in real time. Thus, the meaning field of celebrity becomes even more unstable and contested, its meaning negotiated not only through media producers, but also through the unpredictable, often volatile, participatory culture of the internet. So in the case of Roan, her own participation on online culture has drawn the ire of her fans. So numerous users online have criticized her use of social media, even stating that she needs to hire PR and media representatives. So the following comments I'm going to show are from Reddit, and this comes from a thread that posted an article from Variety about canceled appearances at the All Things Go festival in September 2024, in which she cited the need to prioritize her mental health, noting that her meteoric rise to fame was overwhelming. So the user Rubbing Mango said, from everything I'm reading about her, she sounds like an entitled brat. She def needs a PR team. Poovy Farms Racer said, she's not good at this. Someone get this girl a publicist. Buckseat45 does criticize her, saying it's rare to have a celebrity handle their career so poorly, but also notes she's doing something right because she has so many weird fans that are obsessed with her, but she's god-awful at dealing with them, LOL. Being a celeb in the modern tech social media era would be horrendous, but I can't say I really feel any sympathy. But this last one, I actually really agree with. GTR Genius hits the nail, noting she's terminally online, that's our problem. Seriously, these phones need to go, for Christ's sake, I'm going to a flip phone. So the irony that calls for Roan to get a PR team would actually strip the authenticity that fans seem to crave and the realness that they demand from artists. Paparazzi have long flooded tabloids and the internet, even forcing celebrities to leak fake wedding details to protect their actual wedding. Social media was meant to change all of this by giving artists control over their narratives. But instead of granting freedom, platforms like Instagram and TikTok have only deepened the expectation that artists be constantly accessible, spontaneous, and emotionally transparent. Fans now want polish and vulnerability, professionalism and rawness simultaneously. For someone like Roan, who rose through a cultivated, curated chaos, any move through media coaching might feel like a betrayal of the intimacy that made her popular. Yet the call to do so reveals the impossible standards placed on performers today. The tension is not just about PR, but is about how authenticity itself has become both a commodity and a trap. So in perusing her social media, and this was even a couple days ago because she's posted recently, I noted that her Instagram's recent posts were mostly about her performances, brand deals, and other media, so either press or about her post or a recent appearance on RuPaul's Drag Race, which her outfit, if you saw it, could be an entirely other paper because people don't know satire. So her TikTok does have fewer posts, but does have controversial videos, which have their own articles in the press, some about which were her political views about the 2024 election and concerns about her safety, which I'll go into in a second. And so this was when I looked in June 4th, the comments were actually turned off. But a day before, I was able to get screenshots. And so things just move very quickly in social media. And so for the sake of time, I'm gonna just show a couple clips from about the 2024 election. And so these comments, just when I was looking at them, made me think of the famous quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln. You can please all of the people some of the time, and some of the people all of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time. And so in the digital age, though, this displeasure is public, immediately, and algorithmically amplified. It is not passive or private. And this is a complication that Lincoln could never have envisioned, but his point still stands. No artist, no matter how thoughtful or provocative, can escape criticism entirely. Roan's current backlash is less a sign of her failure and more a reflection of the hyper-visible and hyper-reactive environment in which today's performers operate. From this post-structural perspective, this backlash is not just noise, but is part of the very process by which Roan's identity is constructed. The friction between artist and audience does not just distort meaning, but rather it produces it. So then how is this amplified through a feminist lens? Angela McRobbie's The Aftermath of Feminism offers a useful framework for understanding the gendered contradictions that shape celebrity culture. So she writes that post-feminist media culture promotes an uncritical relation to dominantly commercial produced sexual representations that actively invoke hostility to assumed feminist positions from the past in order to endorse a new regime of sexual meanings based on female consent, equality, participation, and pleasure. So in other words, post-feminist media culture rebrands empowerment as individual choice, visibility, and sexual agency, but only within limits that are emotionally resonant, commercially viable, and ideologically safe. So Chappell Roan's flamboyant aesthetic and emotionally openness align with her with this post-feminist script in which authenticity and vulnerability are rewarded, but also carefully policed. Parasocial relationships intensify these contradictions. Her audience doesn't simply consume her music or performances, but also engage with her persona across platforms in real time, which forms this one-sided yet emotionally charged bond that blur the line between intimacy and surveillance. In this context, the fans' perceived closeness to the artist becomes a mechanism of control. Expressions of empowerment are celebrated when they match fans' expectations, but quickly criticized or corrected when they don't. McRobbie's analysis reveals how this is not just about one fan or one fan base, or one artist or one fan base, but allowed a larger cultural logic, one in which feminist ideas are hollowed out or refashioned into consumable performances, where parasocial audiences act as both supporters and enforcers. In this way, the very intimacy that digital media fosters becomes a site of subtle intimacy, or subtle discipline, where female celebrity is continuously negotiated through the lens of post-feminist expectations. So these tensions are not merely theoretical, as they have direct consequences in the lived experience of the artist. So in one of her supposed controversies, Roan released this following video. Oh, now it's not working?
I need you to answer questions. Just answer my questions for a second. If you saw a random woman on the street, would you yell at her from the car window? Would you harass her in public? Would you go up to a random lady and say, "Can I get a photo with you?" And she's like, "No, what the fuck?" And then you get mad at this random lady? Would you be offended if she says no to your time because she has her own time? Would you stalk her family? Would you follow her around? Would you try to dissect her life and bully her online? This is a lady you don't know. And she doesn't know you at all. Would you assume that she's a good person? Assume she's a bad person? Would you assume everything you read about her online is true? I'm a random bitch. You're a random bitch. Just think about that for a second, okay?
So then here were some responses on this video. So they're completely contradictory. They illuminate the dichotomy faced by celebrities. So they're expected to be constantly available and emotionally generous, but they're criticized when they draw personal boundaries. So one dismisses it entirely, like, girl, you're famous and people like you. Which suggests that visibility erases the right to discomfort. One expresses more self-awareness, noting how uncomfortable it feels to hound famous people. And then one offers this quiet validation, your feelings are valid. These responses reveal not just the range of fan reactions, but the instability of the role that Roan is asked to play, at once a public figure, a personal fantasy, and then a target of projection. So in a parasocial culture that blurs connection with entitlement, even a simple boundary becomes a flashpoint for debate. And then here's another video that came up from a performance, and even look at how it was titled on TikTok.
I just want to be honest with the crowd, and I just feel like
let it go.
I just feel a little off today because I think that my career's just kind of gone really fast, and it's really hard to keep up. And so I just just being honest that I'm just having a hard time today. So I'm sorry that I'm not trying to give you like a lesser show. It's just like there's a lot on
And so I don't even use social media. I'll go back. I don't even use social or TikTok, and this was like all over the rest of my social media. And so it's this simple, honest confession, but one that captures the exhaustion of trying to keep pace with audience demand and media scrutiny and the constantly shifting public image. So what might have once been a private struggle is now not only visible, but expected, dissected, reposted, and then commented on as part of an ongoing performance of celebrity. So vulnerability like this becomes both a release valve and a requirement. It satisfies this cultural hunger for authenticity while exposing the artist to further emotional and interpretive labor. So the tension between the public persona and the private self is not new, but uniquely amplified for women in the spotlight. So as Rojek notes, my autocorrect went crazy, phallocentric society places intense pressure on women to separate the public face from the veridical self. In the case of female celebrity, the pressure upon the veridical self is subject to the syndrome of double estrangement. The celebrity is separated from her true feelings by the social obligations of gender division and alienated by public expectations of the celebrity face that the veridical self may interpret as impertinent and annihilating. Thus, the female celebrity may be said to lead a life in triplex: the person she is, the person male conquest thinks she is, and the public face. So Roan's experience reflects this triplex insistence. Her flamboyant, emotionally open persona, so central to her appeal, is both embraced and weaponized. What Rojek calls triplex identity maps closely onto the impossible position she must navigate daily, balancing authenticity, performance, safety, and fan expectation in a cultural environment that demands exposure, but punishes opacity. Taken together, these three frameworks illuminate the instability at the heart of contemporary stardom. Chappell Roan does not simply express herself. She is constantly negotiating between the self she performs, the self her fans desire, and the self she tries to protect. Ultimately, her case demonstrates how celebrity functions as a shifting site of meaning, where power is dispersed but not evenly shared, and where the demand for authenticity collides with the cultural logic of surveillance. These theoretical frameworks give us tools to understand the cultural forces acting on artists like Roan, but theory can only take us so far. At the end of the day, what's at stake is a person trying to create and connect while navigating pressures most of us will never face. No perfect person is perfect, and celebrities are, after all, people too. We're all problematic in our own ways, saying things that are potentially controversial or offensive to someone, especially on social media. However, I think it's fair to say that no one in this room has the kind of following that Chappell Roan does. So when we say something potentially offensive, it doesn't subject us to public vilification in the same way. As Spider-Man is famously told, with great power comes great responsibility, a burden that, unfortunately, falls heaviest on celebrity. So does that kind of visibility invite more intense scrutiny? Absolutely. In the era of cancel culture and hypervisibility, the fan-artist relationship becomes more complicated. Fans don't just consume, they comment and correct and demand. That kind of emotional and moral investment can put real pressure on artists to perform not just music, but accountability, identity, and values in ways that are constantly shifting. Still, one can hope that the focus eventually stays on what has brought her to this moment in the first place, bold and wonderfully catchy music, and not just the controversy that occasionally surrounds it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Wonderful presentation and perfectly in time, so thank you so much. Let's move on to the second presentation of the day, which is Martine Mussies. I'll just give it to her. I'm sorry, I have done all the marks, but okay, I'm sorry. Martine is a musicologist and PhD candidate in media studies at Maastricht University. Her thesis, MA thesis, examined the representation of polyphemo in opera, and her current doctoral research focuses on the emancipation potential of fan art. Martine has published widely on the representation of King Alfred the Great in contemporary media, including TV series, fan art, fan fiction, exploring how his legacy has been reimagined in various cultural contexts. She combines her academic expertise with her artistic practice, producing music, essays, visual works, and interdisciplinary research. Today, she's going to talk to us about King Alfred on stage and screen, comparing 19th century German operas and modern media representation. Thank you very much, Martine. We welcome you warmly.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and thanks to all the organizers for this wonderful conference. I really learned a lot and I enjoyed myself as well. And I was especially happy that Kim was before me, because I think I've really the other side of the medal. What happens when the celebrity is years and years dead and buried? So I will talk about King Alfred on stage and screen, comparing 19th century German operas and modern media representations. This is very much a work in progress. I wrote the whole paper, but when I was here this morning, I thought, okay, it's more nice to just talk you through it, and if there are some details you would like, I can always look them up on my phone, because I have it here. So King Alfred, who is he? Most British people in the audience will know. I'm not really sure about others, because I had not learned anything about King Alfred in middle school. So maybe you have, but I had not. Here's his timeline. He served as a military commander under his brother King Ethelred against Viking raiders, and that's most reinterpreted section of his life, but he's actually credited with many, many great English things today. So he made the educational system, and he made the law system, and well, he made not the sun and the moon and the stars in the sky, but almost everything. You can find an article explaining how King Alfred has something to do with it. So that was, for me as a Dutch person, that was very funny to read. And of course, modern scholarship is nuancing this nowadays. So what we will do the coming 20 minutes is explore a bit about his historical and contemporary representations. Not so much the historical articles I just gave an overview of, but merely his appearance in art. And the research question is, how does Alfred's image evolve and reflect societal values? So historicity is one of my key things, the ways that Alfred is reimagined and often functions as a mirror of the zeitgeist that surrounds him, and how his personality and appearance are constructed and reconstructed in constant dialogue with his societal environment. So, the relevance and methodology. Why would you compare opera and modern media? Well, I think Kimberly already showed, but some more ideas maybe. That it shows how cultural memory of Alfred reflects the shifting societal and political values. This is especially present in modern day internet. For example, I wrote some articles on how present day authors of fan fiction reimagine the Old English Psalms to make it a tool to approve of alternative sexualities. So there's lots and lots of stuff written about King Alfred approving of bisexuality, approving of transgenderism, approving of BDSM practices, and well, everything you can possibly think of, King Alfred has approved it, but also online, and we all know that when it's online, it's true. But there's also the other side of the medal, that there's this huge corpus of far-right sentiments that's also backed up by King Alfred, and then often he's linked to the main character in Lord of the Rings, and then he's really patriotistic, okay, that's one thing, but also really against anyone that's not from Anglo-Saxon heritage. So that's really nasty, I think, but it's also a part of its heritage, and it shows how all sides of the political spectrum can use and interpret and maybe misuse King Alfred's legacy. So that's That's one. The second one is that it reveals differences in media functions. So nation building is really important in the operas we will talk about today. There's entertainment, like the movies from the 20th century. There are like Robin Hood movies or King Arthur movies. The movies about King Alfred are really similar to that. It is with knights and weapons and horses, and that's really something nice to look at for entertainment. And there's identity negotiation. I already gave some examples of that. That's mostly happening online, but also happening in present-day Netflix series. So that's something interesting, especially because in some of the Netflix series they really stress his position as a disabled person. So he's not the big burly warrior from the statues, but he is actually a real person struggling with his physique. So that's also some negotiation. And it highlights how each era, the Romantic nationalism versus postmodern pluralism, interprets heroism and leadership. So what do we think of a good leader today? This also has many biblical connotations. There is a strong association of King Alfred with King David, especially the harp, of course, but also the leading the people. And also the being not a saint, which is really interesting, I think, because we all know the story of David and Bathsheba, I assume, and there are similar stories surrounding Alfred. And even leading up to the point that in the Netflix series The Last Kingdom, the very first instance where we meet King Alfred, he is walking out of his sleeping chambers and he's buttoning up. And he's like that. And then following him is the maid. So there's really an entrance in a series. This is our great king, and look what they did to him. So lots of backlash there, but also lots of fun. His Christian identity is also scrutinized, something that is really good if you stand for your values, and otherwise people think that it's too rigid, and that's interesting. Also because the series was based on a book series by Bernard Cornwell, and he is really critical on Christianity as maybe not even a religion, but as a social construct. And people who read the book series often comment on that. Oh, the Christian girls are so boring and nagging and just lame. And all the Viking girls, they are really something because they are like the Valkyries. They are really good fighters and they're fierce and redhead, and well, you can imagine. You can imagine. So that's also nice to see what a hero is. Well, how do we approach a comparison? I use an intersectional framework, combined media analysis, comparing the audiovisual and narrative strategies, cultural historical lens, so placing each representation in its context, and reception theory, so tracing how audiences engage with and reshape Alfred's image. For the operas, this is more difficult, of course. For the Netflix series, you can just type it in Google, and just as we saw in Kim's presentation, it will pop up more than you like. Also, the movies that were made about his life, they are all on the bigger movie websites, and then people give the stars or not, and they tell what they liked about it or not. So that's really easy. The opera is more difficult because, as we will see, one was almost never performed. But let's start with structure. So context and theory. Then we have the case studies, the operas versus the modern series. We do a short comparative analysis, and we talk a bit about audience reception and fan cultures, and we will arrive at a very tentative conclusion. So, Alfred the Great Anglo-Saxon king, defender of England, reigned from 871 to 899. He successfully resisted some Viking invasions. Yes and no, he also gave them money to stay out, so I'm not really sure. But he was a key figure in the formation of early English identity and known for strategic military reforms and diplomacy. He became a symbol of leadership, education, Christian virtue. He promoted literature, learning, and translation of English text into Old English. There's a huge discussion amongst scholars which of the text he might have translated himself and which were translated by people around him. But he played a role, and it was in his name, so he was, in any case, involved in that. And his reign often is idealized as a golden age of righteous rule. So he became later, especially in the 19th century, Barbara York called it the Alfredism. He became like an embodiment, an icon, a symbol of national identity and heroic myth. The classical hero's journey. He was appropriated by later eras to symbolize unity and moral strength. This is important for the operas. And he was used in political rhetoric and art to evoke pride and stability. He represents a malleable cultural icon, reshaped to suit changing narratives. Here you can see some of the narratives around him. Well, this is Alfred in the Danish camp, allegedly, that he played the harp in the Danish camp undercover, and then he learned about all their strategics, and then he could defend them. There's a parallel with King David. Then it was the story about when the king forgot the bread, so he was hiding in the Atlantic marshes. And then some women asked him, will you look after my bread? And then he forgot. So there's lots to talk about. And it has been used, even in Doctor Who, it has been used in modern comics and other depictions of him. So, theoretical framework, we already talked a bit about it. We will do media theory, cultural hybridity, mostly Homi Bhabha, the third space, so identity is not fixed but negotiated. Reception theory and fan studies, just like Kim did. The 19th century German opera culture. I choose 2 operas to show to you today, but I found 7 German operas in total. There are more operas that are not German. For example, Donizetti did a King Alfred opera as well, and there are, of course, the English operas with Hail Britannia. And there are also more Singspiel-like examples, so comparable to the performance of Jet that we already heard. But this one I really liked because it's really difficult to trace. One is by Joachim Raff, and it was mostly survived because of the arrangement by Liszt. And I will try to play you a small fragment. Oh, it doesn't work. Wait. Yes. So, as for me, I didn't know Joachim Raff. Oh, okay. I didn't know him, but it turns out that he was quite a prolific composer and that he was rather popular at the time. He started out just composing piano pieces and sending them to his friends, and they, of course, liked it because they were his friends. And they said, oh, you should send them to Mendelssohn, which he did. And then Mendelssohn encouraged him to send some to Breitkopf and Chappell, which is his own publisher at the time. And then the publisher also published Raff, and he became very associated with Liszt. Liszt acted as a mentor for him for some time, but then there was some friction, of course. And nowadays, I think my whole conservatory career, I never had heard of him. So he's, I think he's a bit forgotten. And when you hear the opera and you look at the score, you can imagine, because it's like Wagner, but not with the emotional depth. It's really pompous and really, big brass, really militaristic. So it doesn't suit our time anymore, I think. Then, the 21st century, we have Vikings and we have The Last Kingdom. Those are 2 major series that feature King Alfred. And they are also dissected on YouTube, as you can see in the third image. But on most modern media, you can find them on Tumblr, you can find them on the Facebook, you can find them on X, you can find them on Instagram, TikTok, you name it. And you have fragments of these series and representations of King Alfred. The same myth, a different message. So both mythologize Alfred but reflect their era's values and aesthetics. And this makes a shift from a national symbol to a complex and more humanized character. What the red thread is that Alfred is a bringer of order and chaos, so his civilization versus the barbarism. That's still the case in the Netflix series and in the fan fiction, although these words are reinterpreted very differently. But he remains a beacon of good ideas, so he is used for that. But in opera, he is a noble, unified and unifying hero, and he has a clear triumph. And in the series, he's a very fragile leader. So his illness is played out, his moral conflicts are, his compromises are. So what we would nowadays think of as a more authentic representation. Musical and narrative shifts. The operas are very clear, as the example I showed you. I mean, we can all analyze that harmonically. It's very clear to listen to. It has heroic motives, patriotic choruses, and narrative closure. The series have more psychological depth and ambiguity, and the music reflects this. So they use old English songs, but of course from a bit later period, and then they reimagine it in some sort of tribal way, for example with the Japanese taiko drums. And this reflects the media shift, so from grand national narrative to a more introspective and more authentic realism. Historical memory and identity. In the 19th century, Alfred is used to construct national myths, so Proto-German, Proto-Czech. In the case of Dvořák, the opera was also written in German. It was his very first opera, and he did not perform it. Most likely, he only played it on the piano for his friend Smetana, but it was set to a German libretto, so that's important. And nowadays, Alfred is used more as a mirror for questions of governance, of diversity, of legacy. So from a didactic symbol, he became an interpretive figure. As a cultural touchstone, his meaning shifts with context. So romantic, nationalist, postmodern, and nowadays there are many fan fictions where he is fiercely against Brexit, for example. So he's really mirroring contemporary complaints. Not a fixed icon, but a resonant symbol of changing times. Audience reception. As I said, as for the operas, this is really difficult to pin down, but I assume from what I read about it that the operas were for educated bourgeois audiences and that it was used as a tool of national pedagogy, so to enhance the Germanness of the listener, as one critic put it, and he is portrayed as ideal. And the opera house is a civic space blending myth, music, and identity. And in the 21st century, it's very much fragmented, as we already heard in Kimberly's talk, that celebrity culture is not stable. And that's something we also see surrounding King Alfred on modern media. Fans engage through memes, fan fiction, online debates, and so forth. Also, they make mods for their popular medieval games like Total War. And so you can have a King Alfred mod, and then you can play with or as King Alfred, as you like. So opera flattens his character, it simplifies it, and it elevates it. And the television and other modern media complicate and humanize. So Alfred can be seen as a mirror of the zeitgeist, continues to serve as an avatar for the values of each era. He was an emblem of unity, and his reception in both eras is a form of co-creation. So he becomes a protagonist and a prompt for reflection and critique. So what's next? We have the TV series, the computer games, the mods, the reenactment. I didn't touch upon that too much, but I interviewed people who play as Alfred both reenactors and cosplayers. So some are cosplaying as the actor. This is David Dawson, the actor that plays Alfred on The Last Kingdom. So there are people who are David Dawson on Comic-Con. They are not King Alfred, they are David Dawson. So there's something interesting, a layer on layer, building upon each other. And also fans of David Dawson, they have this Wednesday wisdom on social media, and then it's a quote. If you see it, you think, oh, it's a quote by King Alfred. No, it's a quote from the series, or even from a fan fiction based on the series, something he might have liked to have said in the series. So that how much of this still has to do with the historical Alfred, we can think about that. Yeah, and this is the next level, because AI made this image of Alfred. I just typed into ChatGPT, please make me an image of Alfred, and this is what it came up with. I think it's super interesting. I also did the paper on AI and Alfred. You can check that out. It's published already. Yeah, you can find all my papers and my work via my website. You can send me an email if you would like to learn more about it or have some ideas and thoughts you would like to share. I'm very open to your comments and critique. Also love to do collaborations. And my social media handle on all the different platforms is just my full name with an @ And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martine. So let's move on now, before the Q&A, which will be at the end, with the last presenter of this panel, Vinzent Wesselman. Vinzent is a first-year music PhD candidate at the University of Oxford. His research focuses upon ideas of prestige in cultural education, using the ABRSM's colonial involvement in the early 20th century as primary case study. Coming from a background of history and sociology, Vinzent is interested in investigating how cultural institutions are used to form imagined communities in young nation states. Vinzent received his BA in history from Columbia University, MPhil in modern European history from the University of Cambridge, and MA in sociology from Sciences Po Paris. Today he is going to talk about imported deviance, Halbstarke, celebrity and American youth culture in post-war Germany. Please welcome Vinzent.
Good morning, everyone. So as you can see, this isn't an ABRSM examiner, really, which is what my current research is about. But I thought this topic would be more fitting to the conference today. So I'll be talking about a subculture in post-war Germany called the Halbstarke, and how James Dean and his German copycat, Horst Buchholz, created a fiction for this subculture. So I'll just start my timer. In October of 1955, a budding young actor from Indiana appeared on silver screens across America as a brooding high school student named Jim Stark. This bad boy from a good family captured what Warner Brothers called the drama of today's teenage violence, through elegant knife fights, barbed dialogues, and tender moments which revealed a certain vulnerability underneath the leather jackets sported by the film's deviant teenagers. The film, Rebel Without a Cause, was an instant success, and its lead actor, James Dean, was transformed into a star practically overnight. Yet the press tour for Rebel Without a Cause was an absurdly solemn affair. Dean had died in a car crash 1 month before the film's premiere, mirroring his own character's daredevil tendencies and tragic end. As he transitioned from man to myth, Dean quickly became the devoted subject of conspiracy theories, international fan clubs, and adoring teens who saw themselves in the character of Jim Stark and therefore also in Dean. Look-alike contests sprung up across multiple states in the hopes of finding a passable reincarnation, but judges would not have had to look far for traces of the late movie star. Sports jackets, denim, and leather quickly redefined the fashion of 1950s American youth. Dean was therefore simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, his earthly absence transforming him into an American icon for an aimless post-war generation frustrated with the moral standards and social codes of their parents. As John Howlett writes, the identification with Dean was never, as traditionally with a film star, the fantasy, how nice to be like that. It was instead the conviction, that is how I am. Yet on the other side of the Atlantic, another sort of mirroring was beginning to take place. In September 1956, less than a year after the American release of Rebel Without a Cause, a young actor from Berlin graced the screens of West German cinemas as a swing-dancing, leather jacket-wearing, jazz-loving juvenile delinquent named Freddie Borchert. Posters advertised the story concerned with, quote, the highly topical subject of our time, end quote, and scenes that were, quote, harsh, realistic, and merciless, end quote. The film, Die Halbstarken, rode the wave of success left by Rebel Without a Cause, turning its lead actor, Horst Buchholz, into an instant celebrity and teen heartthrob. Advertising campaign, yet whereas Dean was absent in the wake of his success, Buchholz was very much present. Advertising campaigns, tabloid articles, and occasional interviews allowed for Buchholz to take charge of his image, one which most closely resembled that of his American counterpart in the years following his ascent to stardom. The advertisements for the UK release of Die Halbstarken even promised that viewers that nothing like him has hit the screen since James Dean. Yet despite the many thematic similarities between Rebel Without a Cause and Die Halbstarken, the German echo of Dean's hit film sought to cater to a specifically German audience. While both films center on juvenile delinquency in middle-class communities, Die Halbstarken refers to the 1950s youth riots which took place in West Germany. Wearing the leather jackets and jeans of the American stars they saw on screen, these teens trashed bars and started fistfights after concerts with no identifiable, or at least consistent, political aim. Though these rebellious teens did not identify as a group, the press referred to them as the Halbstarke, a word which literally translates to half strong. The term emphasizes the deviance position between a weak boyhood and a strong manhood, characterizing the teenagers as effeminate young men in a time when masculinity was at the center of a post-war moral panic. German fathers who endured physical disabilities or mental trauma from the war were at times viewed as emasculated in households where women had taken on new roles. Meanwhile, the vacuum left by the hyper-masculine Hitler youth raised questions on how the lack of sufficient recreation, moral education, and strict discipline might impact the development of post-war youth. Die Halbstarken, the film, played to the anxieties surrounding the concurrent Halbstarken subculture, the symbolic vocabulary of which was informed by the fashion, mannerisms, and lifestyle of the fictional youth seen on screen. This paper will therefore examine how the consumerist ethos of emerging teen media facilitated this ongoing exchange between real and fictional representations of 1950s youth. Analysis of Rebel Without a Cause will therefore highlight how these films spoke to contemporary concerns over the state of post-war German youth. And then we will look at early issues of a magazine called Bravo to see how gossip articles then reinforced the presence of these fictional characters in the subculture. So in the end, I will argue that the depoliticization of the Halbstarke riots by West German media delegitimized their relevance as a working-class precursor to the 1968 movement, a conservative tactic which succeeded in painting the frustrations of young Germans as imported deviants from the United States. So we start with Rebel Without a Cause, which premiered in West Germany in March 1956 under the name For They Know Not What They Are Doing, capturing the attention of German audiences half a year after the death of Dean and half a year before the premiere of Die Halbstarken. The film quickly established Dean as a major influence in German youth culture, inspiring young men and women to wear short jackets and jeans that evoke Dean's style. However, while Rebel Without a Cause was a commercial success with the teenage market of West Germany, the film's themes of violence, family discord, and gender norms caused significant anxiety for German adults. As Uta Peuger cites in her book on American culture in a divided Germany, a 1956 Hamburger Anzeiger article on the psychology of the Halbstarke subculture advised parents to treat their children with tolerance and strictness, illustrating the desired result by juxtaposing violent stills of James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause with a picture of a presumably German boy and girl innocently enjoying a picnic in a meadow. This depiction of fictionalized American teenagers as the antithesis to an ideal of German upbringing was shared by the West German Movie Rating Board, which prohibited showings of Rebel Without a Cause to people under 16, fearing that children would view adults as comical figures, become amused by rebellion against authority, and therefore hinder their proper ethical formation. These fears of juvenile delinquency were not entirely unfounded. Between 1956 and 1958, 350 youth riots were registered across Germany, many of which were characterized as Halbstarke rebellions due to the clothes worn by those people present. Who was a social deviant and who merely looked the part, therefore became increasingly difficult to tell, as the aesthetic of the Halbstarke subculture entered the mainstream, leading to an increased hysteria over the scale of the so-called Halbstarke problem. Public fear over the impact of American cultural imports on domestic juvenile delinquency therefore makes the narrative, fashion, and gender roles of this movie all the more important to the subcultural formations of the Halbstarke for both young West German consumers and their very anxious elders. So Rebel Without a Cause is a film about three middle-class high school students who search for morals they cannot receive from their emasculated, incommunicative, or absent fathers. Jim, who is played by Dean, is a new student who quickly falls into trouble with a gang of troublemakers on his first day at his new high school. He's challenged to a game of chicken, which is a sort of daredevil race between two cars, by the gang leader, and the gang leader dies when his car falls off of a cliff. Judy, the gang leader's girlfriend, and Plato, a young admirer of Jim, are both present at the scene, but they quickly run away. Jim returns home to ask his father if escaping the scene makes him a chicken, but his father advises him to lay low. Frustrated with his father's lack of morals, Jim, Judy, and Plato run away to an abandoned mansion where they hope to be safe from the gang. Yet when the discovery leads to a police chase, Plato is shot dead and the film ends in tragedy. That's a quick summary of the movie, but three scenes in Rebel Without a Cause speak directly to the moral anxieties of the 1950s, and they were also mirrored in Die Halbstarken a year later. So while Plato's father has been gone for years and Judy's father refuses to return her affection, Jim is very disgusted by how subservient his father is to his mother. And this is most comically depicted in a scene where Jim's father serves his mother food in a very flowery apron, a scene which is intended to showcase a sort of unnatural inversion of gender roles in Jim's nuclear family and emphasize the emasculation of his father. So Jim is very frustrated with his father's insecurity, and this leads him to prove his own masculinity to himself through the reckless dares of his peers. So the game of chicken is therefore rationalized as a sort of rite of passage in a world where fathers do not provide a sense of direction for their teenage children. Before the race, the gang leader confides to Jim that he actually has nothing against him, despite challenging him to risk his life in order to save his honor. So then Jim asks, "So why are we doing this?" The gang leader just replies, "Well, you've got to do something, don't you?" And so recklessness is not just treated as a momentary break in suburban teenage ennui, but also as an opportunity for young men to assure themselves that they do not flee from responsibility like their fathers, even if these responsibilities are quite made up. By the end of the film, Jim becomes the ideal father figure he expected to have in his own family. When Jim, Judy, and Plato escape to the abandoned mansion, Jim and Judy fall in love and act as parents to Plato. You have to remember, Judy's boyfriend died 6 hours before, so it's kind of a crazy film. Yet when Plato gives them a tour of the mansion, Jim and Judy parody the morals of a middle-class family. So Plato pretends that, oh, this mansion costs $3 million to rent per month, and Judy says, oh, we can manage that. I'll scrimp and I'll save and I'll work my fingers to the bone. So these Protestant ethics of hard work and thrift are ridiculed as pathetically misguided ideals in the face of true luxury, just as the subservience of Jim's father to appease his wife is treated as pitiful when compared to what Dean considers true masculinity. So here you can see Dean's father in his very flowery apron. And there you have the family scene in the mansion, which are really just three teens. And then you have the game of chicken at the bottom there. So Die Halbstarken mirrors a lot of these scenes and ideas. So in 1956, 6 months after the release of Rebel Without a Cause, Georg Tressler premiered a film that looked remarkably similar to its American predecessor, using the advertising slogan harsh, realistic, timely to indicate the film's commentary on contemporary West German social issues. The film follows two estranged brothers, Freddy, who is played by Horst Buchholz, and Jan, as they reconnect with one another and attempt to buy their mother's freedom from their abusive father through a series of heists. Much like Rebel Without a Cause, Die Halbstarke played to young audiences frustrated with the expectations of middle-class society. Yet whereas Jim's father was visibly subservient to his wife, Freddy's father is volatile, strict, and abusive patriarch whose outbursts are prompted by the fact that the role he clings to is frequently undermined by his sons. Priscilla Lane does a very good analysis of this film, in which she notes that the father is even symbolically decapitated by his reflection in a mirror when he confronts his wife about the money she lent to her brother and the demise of their two sons. You can see that mirror there in the first photo. Like in Rebel Without a Cause, this model of masculinity does not suit the protagonists, and the two brothers run away from home to the apartment of Freddy's girlfriend, Sissy. There, Freddy and Sissy make dinner for Jan, acting as a makeshift family not unlike that of Jim, Judy, and Plato in Rebel Without a Cause. Yet when Sissy leaves the kitchen and sadly waits for Freddy to comfort her, she tells Freddy that the cause for her despair is her desire for a new car and a life with him. So feminine consumerism is painted as the real evil in this narrative, prompting Freddy to arrange a series of heists, which Jan agrees to join on the condition that some money is also given to their mother. This requires a rite of passage not unlike the game of chicken. When Freddy and Jan buy a pistol from an elderly man, Freddy dares Jan to knock him out with the butt of the newly purchased gun, as a sort of practice for the real heist. Jan refuses to do so, leaving Freddy to be the bigger man. So the old man lets Freddy knock him out, but before he does so, the old man says, "Get on with it, I still want to go to the cinema," before he crumples to the floor. Just as in Rebel Without a Cause, older men are depicted as fickle, volatile, and directionless, while the young Halbstarke represent a tough, practical, and reckless alternative with morals of their own, as misguided as these morals may be. The heists ultimately end in tragedy. Freddy dies in Jan's arms, while his father tells a stunned policeman at the scene that the young men before him are indeed his sons. The ending is a near parallel to that of Rebel Without a Cause, mirroring the stunned horror of Jim's parents as they realize how desperately their son needed their support when they see him at the crime scene. Like Rebel Without a Cause, Die Halbstarken was deemed unsuitable for children under the age of 16 because the film did not provide, quote, any positive solutions to juvenile upheaval, end quote. Meanwhile, more liberal publications criticized the film as an inaccurate depiction of Germany's rebels, not only because the protagonists were middle class, but because they ventured past aimless rioting and into robbery and murder. However, like James Dean, Horst Buchholz became the heartthrob of West German tabloids through his role as Freddy, and thereby gave his character the appeal of a bad boy with a good heart. Die Halbstarken, the film, like the real-world debates over the Halbstarke in mainstream newspapers, is thus perhaps more telling of the sensationalized fears which tormented adults in the post-war period than an accurate depiction of 1950s youth. This task would ultimately be left to youth publications, such as the highly popular magazine Bravo. In the same year that Rebel Without a Cause and Die Halbstarken premiered in Germany, Bravo magazine published its first issue and became one of the first weekly publications to cater directly to a teenage market. The teenage market, as Bill Osgerby tells us, was highly lucrative in the US at this time as well, as the post-war economic boom increased young Americans' average weekly income. So American magazines such as 17 began to target the high allowances of teenagers after World War II by tying celebrity culture to consumerism. And then, as American films dominated West German cinemas, Bravo offered German teens the same opportunity at mimicry by blurring the line between interviews and advertisements. Both Dean and Buchholz featured prominently in the early issues of Bravo, adding to their lore of their biographies and their commercial potential as trendsetters for teenage fashion. Just as Die Halbstarke adapted the themes of Rebel Without a Cause for a German audience, Bravo and other West German media outlets transformed Buchholz into a German James Dean. Through parallels in their childhood biographies, the framing of their interviews, and the complexities of their personal lives, Buchholz and Dean offer a unique transatlantic example of celebrity mimicry, one which was further replicated by their German fan bases. So the success of Die Halbstarken tied the public image of Buchholz to the character of Freddy, just as Dean was mythologized as a real-life Jim Stark. Both actors grew up without a father and were very close to their mothers, echoing the troubled relations which their on-screen protagonists had with their own fathers. In a 1957 Bravo article titled Halbstarke King Imposter, the Horst Buchholz story, Buchholz is introduced through his memories as a child growing up during World War II. His mother is described tucking him into bed in 1943 with promises that his father will return once the war is over. Yet the young Buchholz can no longer remember what his father looks like, nor when he last saw him. As the tide of war changes, Buchholz is sent east to be housed in a youth camp with other children. The article goes on to dramatically recount how, upon learning that the Russian army has arrived in Berlin, Buchholz snuck out of the camp at night to head west so that he could protect his mother. The article ends when Buchholz asks some Nazi soldiers for food and is sent back to the camp only to find the bunk beds empty and the complex deserted. The article ends there, promising to resolve this cliffhanger in a forthcoming issue and packaging his biography into a serial form nearly indistinguishable from a work of flash fiction. Yet this gripping account of Buchholz's childhood shares significant similarities with his on-screen character. In fact, the pictures accompanying the article are also not of Buchholz, but rather his fictional character Freddy. By blurring the line between Buchholz and his on-screen character, Bravo used the same myth-making tactics to maintain the public image of the German James Dean, which have been used to ensnare teenagers into the lore of the original James Dean. Indeed, several pages after the Buchholz story, an article titled "I Was Jimmy's Friend" presents the reader with the late American star in a leather jacket. Published in 1957, 2 years after Dean's death, the article describes the evening when Marlon Brando tried to dissuade Dean from reckless racing, a hobby shared by his on-screen character, Jim Stark. As in the article on Buchholz, the story is highly dramatized, relies upon a third-party source, and is displayed next to a large photo of Dean's character in a film. So the sensationalized biographies of Dean and Buchholz, placed next to images of their fictional characters, fuse their off-screen lives with their on-screen performances, making their films no less fictional than the myths which shape their public images. I won't go too into detail into this, but I think it's also remarkable that in television interviews, oftentimes these stars appeared just on set in costume. So here you have a 1955 article, interview with James Dean, where he's preparing for his last film called Giant. He's dressed up as a cowboy. And here you have one where Horst Buchholz is preparing for his film, The Magnificent Seven. And the interviewers are interviewing them in full costume, so it's hard to tell, is this the character? Is this the real actor? This is a very blurred line. But between the pages of celebrity gossip and love advice, advertisements in early issues of Bravo promised teenagers access to the look and lifestyle of their favorite movie stars. As Rebecca Feasy argues in her feminist analysis of Heat magazine, details of clothes worn by actors, their costs, and where to purchase them offers readers a sense of celebrity membership. For example, a 1958 issue of Bravo contains an advertisement titled "The James Dean Jacket, now available in Germany," which informs readers that James Dean had 4 leather knit jackets in red, beige, green, and cognac, and hated when other people wore them, the same jacket as he did. But the article says only his friends were gifted the same model jacket, and maybe you can guess what colors they were. They were also in red, beige, green, or cognac. So through the act of purchasing the jacket, the fan feeds their illusion that they belong to the select circle of Dean's friends who sported his clothing, strengthening the parasocial relationship between fan and celebrity. Ellis Cashmore describes this parasocial relationship as one which influences the way we think and feel about people we don't know and who don't know us, but sometimes move us to act. So this advertisement exemplifies this phenomenon by manipulating Dean's lore to fit within a commercially viable narrative, one which entices the reader to act upon their desire to mimic a celebrity through a commercial transaction. Yet while such advertisements sought to encourage mirroring between film stars and their fan bases, the aesthetic language of Dean and Buchholz was dangerously interchangeable with that of the real-life subculture they themselves emulated, die Halbstarke. So the association of American fashion trends with juvenile delinquency was central to the hysteria surrounding the Halbstarke problem, frequently leading police to arrest teenagers based on their looks rather than their actions. The September 1956 issue of Bravo directly addresses this form of profiling in an open letter to the police, 1 page after its advertisement for Buchholz's movie, Die Halbstarken. The article protests every young man who wears tight trousers, drives through town with other young people on mopeds or motorcycles, or acts a bit out of line, as it was common before, is suddenly a Halbstarke. Enough, the article continues. There is no Halbstarke generation and no Halbstarke problem. There are only a few rowdy teens, and they have always existed. The article ends by arguing that politicians are to blame for any increase in juvenile delinquency, citing the lack of sports centers and an unwillingness to cooperate with youth on an equal playing field. This protest, published between two film advertisements, is remarkable for two reasons. First, it draws a line between the real-world Halbstarke and the film stars who appropriate their symbolic vocabulary. Whereas police officers and government officials believe that youth dressed as on-screen deviants would also adopt their morals, Bravo addresses the purely aesthetic value of this mimicry despite the parasocial relationships its advertisements encourage. Second, the article blames the lack of youth recreation centers for the supposed uptick in juvenile delinquency. This was a key concern amongst German parents following World War II, who feared that the lack of moralizing institutions such as the Hitler Youth would fail to provide the necessary guardrails for the post-war generation. As Martin Kolb has written, this vacuum made juvenile delinquency one of several highly moralized post-war discourses. Kolb discusses how in 1947, Munich police organized police raids targeting bars, movie theaters, and restaurants with the aim of arresting loitering male youth. While such raids were less common in the 50s, the Bravo article shows that the criminalization of doing nothing as loitering was largely influenced by the symbolic language of deviance popularized through films such as Rebel Without a Cause and Die Halbstarken. So where does this leave the Halbstarken? The end of the Halbstarken, both as a political issue and as a subculture, is difficult to determine given the nebulous nature of the Halbstarke problem itself. Rudolf Schlichtinger, an SPD politician from Bavaria at the time, argued that the word Halbstarke must vanish from discussion, for it gives truly criminal youth the chance to hide within the general youth population. By 1970, Schlichtinger got his wish. A search for the frequency with which the word Halbstarke appears in the Süddeutsche Zeitung shows that the word had practically fallen out of use following 1968. Yet this seems to indicate a change in the appearance or nature of juvenile delinquency, not a shift in youth crime, because numbers published by the National Center for Political Education do not show a significant decrease in incidence of youth crime between 1950 and 1970. The Halbstarke, like all subcultural movements, thus seem to have disappeared as soon as their aesthetic vocabulary was appropriated by the mainstream and thereby lost its symbolic value. This emphasizes the role which media and celebrity mimicry played in Halbstarke hysteria as new celebrities, new narratives, and new products shaped the youth culture in the late 60s. Horst Buchholz made the cover of Bravo 18 times, with his last appearance in 1967. The final Bravo issue, featuring the German James Dean, thus seems to mark the end of the Halbstarke era, 1 year before 1968 would usher in a new generation of rebellious youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. As usual, now we take 5 minutes to discuss among ourselves, and then time for Q&A. minutes have passed, and so I guess it's time for... Oh, we don't have so much time, but is there any question for our three presenters? Who wants to start? Let's see. Thank you. Catherine?
I really enjoyed this session. I didn't know a lot of, I mean, I know James Dean, but I don't know Roan. I've never heard of her. So I mean, are there other people?
Time I would have played.
Are there other folks in the audience who haven't heard of her? Or am I just the only one?
We just played a little. I just played a little bit.
I wish I'd heard a song. I mean, that would have been a nice thing. Yeah. I was just thinking of parallels. We were talking about parallels between papers from yesterday and today, and I see. There are a lot of parallels. The types of things that folks talked about today, in terms of like the audience participation or the audience pressure on performers to do something. Now, with Abbott, for example, she didn't get into politics. That was a whole different thing. But she was pressured by her audience to add songs to her performances. For which she was excoriated in the press, that, how dare you do this? I mean, there's a whole movement during the 19th century of publishers in particular and composers wanting to get control of what's being presented on the operatic stage, and performers still wanting to have some control themselves. And which she did, and there I have examples of her being attacked by critics for singing a song, "The Last Rose of Summer" or something, and she responds to that in the press and says, "I had a petition from 100 people in the audience who signed a request that I sing this song, and so what do you expect me to do? It's my audience." So I think it's the same kind of a problem, but today it is so it's so exacerbated, it's so fast, it's so big, it's so powerful in a very different way. And it's downright scary. At least to me it is in any case.
I think what's different too is that it's not just the press now, it's the audience, it's the fans. And so that's kind of in the parasociality, and that's what I was noticing with Smythe, with my work with Smythe and with Abbott too. It's the addition to the critics, it's also the fans. And like you're saying, it's so immediate.
Yeah.
And even like from when I wrote this, when I was working on it, and then like even in like a week or in a day, there's more. Yeah. Right, and so it's so immediate, and even within media studies, like it's just constantly like you can keep up with things,
right,
and stuff happens. There's breaking news all the time.
Right,
everything's always breaking all the time, right?
Yeah,
and so it's like
I made that point yesterday,
yeah.
saying that we are accustomed to immediate news. We're either accustomed to it and we're blessed with it or cursed with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's two-sided.
Everything's breaking. Yeah.
So thank you for the papers. Great. Everybody. I mean, all three.
Massimo, there's a question there.
Thank you very much. I totally share what you said, your comments, because there are many analogies, and I think the big difference is in the acceleration and the more inclusive way in which audience participates in this discussion. Sharing a responsibility in shaping the star, the diva, the personality, the public image, and so forth. And I think it was very similar in the 19th century, and also in terms of what you presented with James Dean. I'm thinking of Marietta Piccolomini singing Traviata in Victorian London, and the very blurred line that divided the public image and the character is very similar to what happened in post-war Germany, where the fear that young ladies could imitate the very immoral behavior of Traviata, of Violetta on stage. And this was censored. Yeah. So it was considered so dangerous for the society. They had to censor some scenes from the opera because of the moral implications, and the character and on stage and the lady in private life were very often, let's say, assimilated to the same level. So I think there are many similarities, many analogies and parallels, except for the acceleration and the more inclusive way in which today everybody could send a message, put some Facebook image and comments. And I was wondering whether the filter of the agent, the PR person, is to some extent similar to what in 19th century agents or impresario did. So in your case, I think it was clear that she answered the message herself, but I wonder whether in other case public stars or international stars really do it themselves, or have kind of mediators.
Who's a relatively famous singer-songwriter, and I asked him one day, I was like, I know, and he was like, well, I run my Twitter, well, he doesn't use Twitter anymore, but before Elon bought it, he was like, I use my Twitter, but that's the only social media that I actually use. And then people were like, oh wow, he has an Instagram, I'm gonna follow. He responded to an Instagram comment of mine, or like, oh, he friended me, I have his Facebook, and I'm like, he doesn't use us. That's his manager, and so, and I know like a personal, and I'm like, so if he does that, then I can only imagine how many other like people don't actually run their own accounts, and so we can only surmise how many, and there's everything is so carefully curated, and I know like how much of my social media I curate, and so because it's so accessible, and the internet is forever, right? And so, and even I looked and I was like, oh God, my live journal from when I was in high school still exists. And if only, I found this like emo poetry, and I'm like, the internet is literally forever, right? Like even if we delete it, it's still there somewhere in the ether. And so, if thinking like, agents and PR control all of that. And so it is that, yeah, like you're saying, it's not really up to people if they want to preserve that public image. And so then if they do, then it's that very towing that line of how do you actually manage it? How do you actually control it? Do you control it? You know, what do you choose to do?
There's a question from Richard.
Thank you everyone for this morning's session. Very cool. I've got a question for Vinzent. Thinking about the creators of the two different films, both sets of creators probably born around the time of the First World War. And then looking at the older characters that they're creating, they're presumably representative of the same generation. How do they compare those two? Because I feel like the societies that they're representing are very different.
So how do the fathers in the two films compare?
You've got the weakened American father and the weakened German father, and yet that generation were very aware. The creators were very aware of the type of character, the type of person that they were creating.
They're actually two quite different characters, even though they're both undermined by their sons. So the American father, he's like in the apron and he's like very subservient to his wife, and his wife is very demanding. Whereas the German father, he's actually the opposite. He always has these outbursts of rage and anger, and he can't understand why people won't follow what he wants them to do. And in my research for this, I didn't include it, but there's like quite a few studies, like psychological studies with children who were born after the war and the relationships they had with their fathers. And there's this reoccurring theme of many fathers having difficulty talking about that time and therefore shutting down and then just unleashing rage in moments every now and then. So I think that the father character in Die Halbstarken is quite representative of that. And although they're both fathers are undermined by their sons, they're very different in character.
And do you think that relates with the German father? Does that relate with Halbstarke?
I don't have a direct quote about Halbstarke talking about their fathers, but it definitely is that way in the fictionalized version. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh yeah, cool. There I am. I have a question for Martine, because I felt really a bit personally connected with your work because I live down in Winchester, where you can you can have a drink in the King Alfred pub, you can eat in Alfie's restaurant. Oh, wonderful! Yeah, that's great. But the other thing we have is a Tudor, I believe, imagining of King Arthur's Round Table.
Yes.
And I was struck that there's maybe a number of parallels with King Arthur, because Bernard Cornwell also wrote a series of King Arthur imaginings, which have the similar kind of Christian thing going on. Yeah, precisely. And you also have the operatic tradition in the 19th century. And I wondered, whether you'd looked into that, but whether there was something kind of specific about King Alfred's story that you think comes out in the way people imagine and reimagine him, or if he's just a convenient figure the way that maybe Arthur also is.
Yeah, that's one of the questions that has been bothering me as well, actually. I think that it is convenient because there has already been so much written about him. So I read lots and lots and lots of books and articles, 18th, 19th century, about his heroism and about all the great things he did for England. So people know his name, and then it's more easy. But it's also easy because we do not have that many facts, actually. I mean, we have the Asser, of course, who was like some sort of biography, but even what's in there, we are not really sure. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle follows the same pattern. So just like with King Arthur, it's really easy to project your own thoughts on him. He's not completely a blank canvas, but there's so little filled in that you can easily use that. And as for the operas, I think that's exactly what happened, that there is this emerging idea about the nation state and about unity and about a strong leader leading the country, and that's very easily projected onto King Alfred, and I think that led to the outburst of German language libretti, and then of course when you're a composer looking for a libretto, you can find it, but I also think it's really interesting in the case of Dvorak, for example. If I remember correctly, this opera was the first one written by Dvorak. It was in, I think, the year 70, but he never had it on stage. He only played it most likely to his friend Smetana, and it was to a German libretto. And then, of course, Czech nationalism came up. So the operas. Is it me? Okay. The operas that Dvorak really became successful with are based on Slavic / Czech / Czechoslovakian folklore, like Rusalka, like the myth about the mermaid. And there's also a striking difference in musicality of the two works. So we started with like the first session about this twin model, about masculine and feminine and melody and harmony and stuff. And I immediately thought about Dvorak and King Alfred versus the Rusalka, and I think that there might be something comparable at stake there. And most juicy detail is that when Dvorak was already dead and gone, and people still loved his works, then they translated the King Alfred opera into Czech, and they actually staged it and performed it, and it was a success, but not the German version. So, yeah. There's lots to untangle there still, and I'm planning to write lots of articles about this. Yeah.
Before writing anything else, I guess it's time to drink some coffee.
Yes.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, our three presenters of tomorrow.